Britain in the 1950s was a country trying to believe in itself again. Bombed streets were slowly rebuilding. Factory chimneys filled the skies once more. Families who had survived rationing and war finally dreamed of something larger than survival. For many, that dream arrived on four wheels. A motorcar meant freedom, respectability, progress. It meant Sunday drives through the countryside, holidays at the seaside, and the quiet pride of parking something new outside a modest brick home. But behind the polished chrome and carefully staged showroom smiles, some British cars concealed disasters so severe they shocked the nation itself. Some broke down within weeks, others rusted before their owners had finished paying for them. A few nearly destroyed the reputations of the companies that built them. And in post-war Britain, disappointment carried a heavy cost. These are 10 British automotive disasters from the 1950s that became symbols not of hope, but regret.
At number 10 was the Austin A40 Somerset. When Austin introduced the Somerset in 1952, it looked reassuringly traditional. Rounded wings, a tall, upright grille, and soft leather seating gave it the appearance of a dependable family companion. For ordinary British buyers stepping into car ownership for the first time, it felt safe, respectable even. Under the bonnet sat a modest 1.2-liter engine, producing just over 40 horsepower. On paper, that sounded sufficient for post-war roads. Reality felt painfully different. The Somerset was heavy, sluggish, and exhausting on long journeys. Drivers complained about weak acceleration, vague steering, and alarming body roll through corners. Climbing hills with a full family aboard often became an embarrassing crawl while lorries thundered past. Yet families kept buying them because alternatives were limited, and Austin carried enormous trust in Britain. That trust slowly began to crack. Owners spoke of frustrating reliability issues and costly repairs arriving far too soon. For many households already stretching tight budgets, the car became less a symbol of progress and more a source of anxiety parked outside the house every morning. But compared to what came next, the Somerset almost seemed forgivable.
At number 9 was the standard Vanguard Phase 1. When the Vanguard appeared in 1948 and continued into the early 1950s, it looked startlingly modern by British standards. Inspired heavily by American styling, its wide body and streamlined curves promised a glamorous future Britain desperately wanted to embrace. To working-class families, the Vanguard looked expensive, sophisticated, almost foreign, and that was exactly the appeal. Powered by a 2.1-liter engine, it delivered reasonable performance for the era, but beneath the confident styling lay serious quality concerns. Poor panel fitment, electrical faults, and weak build consistency became impossible to ignore. British weather quickly exposed another enemy: rust. Rainwater crept into body seams, wheel arches deteriorated rapidly, and corrosion often appeared shockingly early. Owners who proudly polished their new Vanguard on weekends watched helplessly as bubbling paint and decaying metal slowly consumed their investment. For some families, the car they had saved years to afford already looked tired after only a few winters. And then came a machine whose problems reached far beyond rust alone.
Number 8 was the Morris Marina's spiritual predecessor, the Morris 6 MS. Launched in the late 1940s but lingering painfully into the 1950s, the Morris 6 was intended to offer executive comfort to Britain's growing middle class. Walnut trim, broad seats, and a smooth, straight-six engine gave it an air of quiet prestige. For doctors, businessmen, and ambitious professionals, it represented a rival. But the experience rarely matched the image. Its heavy steering and cumbersome handling made narrow British roads feel exhausting. Fuel economy was dreadful at a time when every shilling mattered, and maintenance costs steadily climbed. Owners expected refinement. Instead, many inherited endless mechanical frustrations. Worst of all, the car felt old almost immediately. While European manufacturers embraced lighter and more modern engineering,
The Morris 6 seemed trapped in another decade entirely. Buyers who once admired its size began viewing it as outdated and wasteful. Still, the next disaster would become notorious for something even more humiliating.
Number 7 was the Hillman Minx. Few cars captured post-war optimism quite like the Minx. Affordable, attractive, and marketed heavily toward ordinary British households, it quickly became a familiar sight across suburban streets and countryside lanes alike. For thousands of families, it was their first proper car. That emotional connection mattered enormously. The Minx promised reliability and simplicity, but owners soon discovered troubling weaknesses hiding beneath its cheerful image. Gearboxes wore prematurely, engines struggled under stress, and electrical gremlins became maddeningly common. Long journeys often turned into exercises in patience. Drivers carried tools in the boot almost as standard equipment. Breakdowns at the roadside became embarrassing family memories. Children waited quietly while fathers lifted bonnets beneath cold rain and steam drifted into the evening air. And yet, many owners could not afford to replace them. They simply endured. But Britain's next automotive embarrassment would test patience in an entirely different way. At number 6 was the Ford Consul Mark I. Now, technically built by Ford Britain, the Consul represented a dramatic shift toward modernity. Introduced with sleek styling and advanced features like McPherson strut suspension, it looked futuristic beside many conservative rivals. At first, buyers were captivated. Inside bright showrooms, the Consul seemed like a glimpse into a better tomorrow. Families imagined smoother journeys, modern comfort, and dependable engineering from a trusted company. Then reality intervened. The early Consuls suffered severe structural weaknesses and alarming reliability concerns. Suspension failures became notorious, and poor body durability caused widespread frustration. In some cases, corrosion appeared so aggressively that relatively young cars already looked exhausted. Owners who once admired the car's innovation began fearing expensive repairs. And in post-war Britain, few things damaged trust faster than mechanical humiliation. Still, the next car would stain one of Britain's proudest manufacturers.
Number 5 was the Wolseley 444. Wolseley had once symbolized refinement and quiet British dignity. The 444, launched in the early 1950s, attempted to preserve that image with elegant styling, polished wood interiors, and an unmistakably upscale atmosphere. From a distance, it looked sophisticated. Too bad the driving experience felt so disappointing. Its tiny 1.3-liter engine struggled badly against the car's weight. Acceleration felt painfully slow, especially on crowded roads where traffic speeds were increasing across Britain. Owners expecting graceful touring instead found themselves trapped in sluggish frustration. Many buyers had stretched their finances purely for the prestige of the Wolseley badge. That made the disappointment feel deeply personal. Neighbors admired the car parked outside, but owners knew the truth hidden beneath the chrome and polished paint. The illusion of luxury could not hide the exhausting lack of performance. Yet another British company was about to create something even more infamous.
At number 4 was the Jowett Javelin. On paper, the Javelin should have been a triumph. Aerodynamic styling, advanced engineering, and excellent handling made it remarkably ambitious for its time. Some motoring journalists even praised its innovation. But innovation alone could not save it. Production quality proved disastrous. Mechanical failures appeared with alarming frequency, and the complex engineering often overwhelmed owners and mechanics alike. Head gasket failures, overheating, and gearbox problems became painfully common. For buyers seduced by its futuristic promise, ownership soon became exhausting. Cars sat stranded at garages for weeks awaiting repairs. Family holidays were interrupted by breakdowns. Confidence evaporated. Worst of all, the financial strain nearly destroyed the company itself. And somehow, the next disaster managed to hurt Britain's reputation even further.
Number 3 was the Triumph Renown. The Renown carried enormous expectations.
With flowing lines and grand proportions, it looked like the sort of car that should glide silently past stately homes and luxury hotels. It represented aspiration. There was just one problem. The engineering beneath it already felt obsolete. By the 1950s, buyers increasingly wanted modern handling, stronger performance, and improved efficiency. Instead, the Renown delivered an experience rooted firmly in pre-war thinking. Its separate chassis construction and heavy body made it cumbersome, while reliability concerns steadily damaged customer confidence. Owners expected elegance. What they often received was frustration wrapped in expensive sheet metal. As newer European designs surged ahead, the Renown became an uncomfortable reminder that parts of Britain's motor industry were falling behind the modern world. But the next car would become synonymous with one of Britain's greatest automotive embarrassments. Number 2 was the Austin Princess 4. This was supposed to be British luxury at its finest. Long, flowing bodywork, limousine-like comfort, and handcrafted interiors made the Princess feel deeply prestigious. Politicians, executives, and wealthy buyers were drawn toward its quiet grandeur. Inside, there was polished wood, soft leather, and old-world elegance. But beneath that elegance lurked catastrophic unreliability. Electrical failures plagued owners relentlessly. Overheating issues became common, and the immense weight strained mechanical components constantly. Repairs were expensive. Parts were difficult to source. Some owners spent more time arranging maintenance than actually driving the car. And because the Princess existed at the top of British motoring society, every failure felt public, humiliating. The kind of embarrassment people whispered about at golf clubs and business dinners. Yet even the Princess could not compare to the disaster that claimed the number 1 spot.
At number 1 was the Rover 75 P4 Cyclops. Today, many remember the P4 fondly, but when the early Cyclops version arrived in 1949 and entered the 1950s, its unusual central headlamp immediately divided Britain. Some were horrified by the styling, others simply laughed. But the real problems went deeper than appearance. Rover aimed to create an advanced executive saloon with modern engineering and respectable performance from its 2.1-liter engine. Instead, buyers encountered reliability concerns, awkward maintenance issues, and a design many considered deeply unattractive. The public reaction was brutal. Newspapers mocked it, buyers hesitated. Owners felt self-conscious driving something so visually controversial through conservative British streets. In an era when appearance and social respectability mattered enormously, the Cyclops became a rolling source of embarrassment. And for Rover, the backlash forced rapid redesigns simply to repair public confidence. By the end of the 1950s, Britain's roads were changing. Sleeker European imports were arriving. Expectations were rising. Families wanted reliability, comfort, and modern engineering that many domestic manufacturers struggled to deliver consistently. Yet these cars remain fascinating precisely because they were flawed. They tell the story of a country rebuilding itself after unimaginable hardship. A nation filled with ambition, pride, and optimism, even when reality failed to cooperate. For ordinary Britons, these cars carried dreams to work every morning. They transported children to seaside holidays. They stood outside terraced homes as symbols of progress and dignity. And when they failed, the disappointment felt deeply human. Because these were never just machines. They were promises. Promises that sometimes rusted away beneath the wind-soaked skies of post-war Britain. And perhaps that is why these forgotten automotive disasters still matter today. Not because they were perfect, but because they reveal the fragile hopes of an entire generation trying to move forward. Which of these British automotive disasters do you remember most vividly? And are there any forgotten motoring failures from the 1950s that still deserve a place in history? If you enjoyed this journey through Britain's troubled motoring past, consider subscribing for more forgotten stories from the golden age of British cars.
And in the next film, we'll explore the beautiful British cars of the 1960s that almost saved the nation's fading automotive pride.